Thanks for tuning into this week's episode of the
We Got It podcast.
And oh my goodness.
We're flying high right now.
Flying high. Being at the Chrysler Center, I didn't think I could have that much fun in that building. I did not think it was possible to have that much fun in that building, and I couldn't even cheer during the game, which maybe was a good thing for me.
Maybe it was good for both of us not to get beat up in that arena.
Yeah, probably a good idea. I definitely had to sit on my hands at the end of the game as all the little Michigan fans were scurrying out of their seats before the game was even over. Let's talk about some fair weather fans, shall we? But, I had to sit on my hands, had to prevent myself from just doing that little Will Tiemann wave goodbye. But it's all good because we walked away with the W, and it's not the only W that the men's basketball team walked away with this week, with another massive victory over Purdue.
Yes.
This has been a grueling 7 days. And for those of you who are really missing the episode last week, we are truly so sorry. We're not pros at this, and there were some errors in the recording process. Unfortunately, we both work full-time and just did not have the time to re-record and edit and get that episode out for you guys. But really, since the last time you've heard from us, we've been able to bag 3 massive wins on the road against Illinois, at home versus Purdue, and on the road against our biggest rivals. So, yeah, we're flying high for sure.
Absolutely.
For those of you who don't know, the We Got It podcast is an official podcast of Spartans Illustrated. We both put a couple, I think, pretty decent articles up on the Spartans Illustrated page today. So if you haven't checked them out, be sure to head over to Spartans Illustrated. It's where you'll find all of our episodes linked. There's so much great content there. From Tom Izzo post-game presser pieces to game recaps to game previews, exclusive player quotes that Spartans Illustrated is going in there and getting. It's really just your one-stop shop for all things MSU athletics. And while you're over there, since you're already online, if you wouldn't mind hopping over to YouTube, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, if you haven't already, like, subscribe, review, all of those things help this podcast get out to more and more Spartan fans so they can share in the joy of being victorious against Michigan this week.
Absolutely. We got a lot to talk about this episode, so let's get into it.
Welcome to the We Got It podcast.
Abby, how in the world is first place in the Big Ten feeling for you right now?
Feels like my cheeks hurt. I just have been having so much fun this week. And honestly, coming off of that Indiana loss, I didn't know if it was possible to have this much fun with this team again. And maybe, that's on me for getting down in the dumps. There were a lot of Spartan fans out there who were down in the dumps during the first half of that Michigan game. And I weirdly had just like this sense of calm for the first 30 minutes of the game, which makes absolutely no sense. And then when we finally actually started burying them, I was like sick to my stomach. I was like, something's going to go wrong. I don't know what's happening. But Trey managed to seal the deal with that third 3. We're going to get into all of it. Let's just start off. I want to just react to that game. What was a moment that is just living rent-free in your mind from the Michigan game on Friday?
I mean, there are a ton of moments to go over. And I mean, you already touched on that stretch where this isn't his first time he's done it.
No.
But Trey Holloman, again, in under 90 seconds, hits triples on 3 straight possessions to absolutely silence the crowd, really put the dagger in for Michigan and secure this massive win in the rivalry. And like you said, this has been a brutal stretch for Michigan State. I think after that Indiana game, looking at these next 6 days of, like you said, Illinois, Purdue, Michigan, I think hey, if we can get 2 of these 3, maybe we'll get back in right shape. But no, the Spartans didn't just get 2 wins. They got 3 victories.
3 for 3, baby.
None
Love it.
By a margin smaller than 9 points.
And not even a margin smaller than 9 points. Let's talk about the way that these guys closed out these last 3 games. Against Illinois, after a very rough first half, which honestly has kind of been a theme this week.
Yes.
Michigan State, as my brother aptly put it, especially after the first half at Illinois, like that was a classic MSU first half on the road. And,
Mm-hmm.
Really the only fact that I think we were up at halftime against Purdue might have been the home crowd, honestly, because in each of those games, we let them go on some pretty significant
Mm-hmm.
runs. But where the Spartans went on runs? In the last 4 minutes when it really mattered, the last 8 minutes,
Mm-hmm.
truly, against Illinois, where they had a 15 to, I honestly think it was negative
Yep,
two.
it was -2.
-2 run against Purdue because they had a goaltending call that was then taken back during one of the breaks. And then 9-0 runs against both Purdue and Michigan in the last 4 minutes of the game. These boys have been locking it down and saying, not in our house, and frankly, not in your house either.
And I think that's maybe why when we're experiencing these runs, when Michigan goes on that 18-2 run, Chrysler is rocking. Michigan has all the momentum. But we've seen these guys do it over and over again. They simply cannot get rattled. I think they were down by 14 or 15 against Oregon, 16 against Illinois, 8 points against Purdue, 8 points against Michigan, and those were wins in every single one of those games. 2 at home, 2 on the road, and just the mental toughness of this team to be able to, in the face of adversity, backs against the wall, coming off of a tough loss against Indiana, and rattle off 3 quad 1A wins in 6 days. It's just remarkable.
Absolutely. And that's the kind of thing that I think we keep saying this ad nauseum of, like, the team that can show this kind of grit, the team that can dig deep and pull out these things, even when shots aren't falling, even when calls aren't going your way, that's a team that can make a run in March. And honestly, I feel more confident saying that now after this intense 7-day stretch than I think I have before. Because, and I think Robbie Hummel really aptly put it on the Locked On podcast with Matt Sheehan of, this is when you're kind of getting a simulation of what the NCAA tournament looks like, what the Big Ten tournament looks like having to do this back-to-back prep. And, Tom Izzo and his presser after the game, really anybody who talks about it knows that Michigan State puts more effort into prepping for Michigan than probably any other team. Michigan State takes this rivalry seriously. U of M fans like to take it seriously when they win, and then they like to downplay it when they lose.
Yep.
Well, leave that where it is. However, you think about how much prep they had to do in order to get ready for Michigan. And it's not like they had someone that they could overlook leading up to Michigan. You're playing Purdue. And honestly, those two teams have very different strengths. Something that I really want to credit, and we're going to talk about this more in the We Got It Covered segment that we wanted to do last week, coming off the zone that Indiana played. We were pretty nervous because we know that Purdue, we know that Michigan have both run zones. Honestly, kind of shocked that Purdue didn't pull out that zone against us, but Michigan sure as heck did. So we'll get into that more in our upcoming segment. But the ability for our guys to be able to take that in stride and adjust to all of those different strengths that they had to combat in Illinois, in Purdue, in Michigan, I can't say enough about them.
Yeah, being able to put that much detail and focus, and especially for this Michigan game, in 2 days coming off of those back-to-back games against Illinois and Purdue, against a defense where you struggled against. So this wasn't just a stereotypical offense or a vanilla offense. Defense. This was a defense that was going to be very unique, especially too because Michigan's zone is different than Indiana's. They play more of that 1-3-1 pressure kind of on the front court or back court. And Michigan State honestly handled it really, really well. There were stretches where they were kind of befuddled. But overall, they were able to do what they weren't able to do against Indiana, and that's get into the paint.
And just adjust to whatever they're doing. And it really forced them to adjust because they're constantly switching back and forth between that man-to-man and, like you said, that 1-3-1 zone coverage. And honestly, I don't think you slipped up right there. You said this, they're not playing against a vanilla offense. I think especially when it comes to Michigan, because Michigan fronts 2 7-footers who are very agile, very fluid, and who love to run that kind of pick and roll off of one another, which is something you really don't see much of at all, let alone kind of a power forward in Wolf who can slide out to the perimeter and make big shots. And honestly, and this is something that we'll talk about the offense that we saw this week. Maybe we need to start there, but we'll talk about the defense for sure. I want to make sure that it has its moment. The way that we are able to contain the way that Michigan especially wanted to run their offense and prevent them from really getting, Vlad Golden got his points, but we were really able to keep them from doing, I think, a lot of the things that they wanted to do on offense.
Absolutely. And even when Michigan went on that big 18-2 run, it wasn't necessarily because they were making a lot of things happen in the half court. It was turnovers from Michigan State, transition from Michigan. So even though they won in that run, and credit to them, when they were working in their half court offense, trying to get that pick and roll going, they just didn't really get it going at all last night. And credit to the bigs from Michigan State, who, if you look at the box score, had a very, very quiet night.
Yes.
They did phenomenal at defending that pick and roll that Michigan wants to do with those 2 7-footers, and really mitigated a lot of offense for Michigan when it seemed like that would be a struggle for them going into the game.
And, I said maybe we'd get into this later, but let's just get into it now because you went there. It's so interesting. Like, even just, I've been consuming like so much Spartan media, as I'm sure so many of us are, coming off of just like such a fun big week for Spartan fans. And I think Matt Sheehan posted it on his personal Twitter of like, when MSU basketball is good, life is good. And life is feeling pretty good right now. But I think it's really easy in these big games or like these big performances. Obviously, we're going to shout out some more of the performances from Trey, from Jace Richardson this week, from, even like Jackson Kohler, different guys who showed up in the Purdue game. It was a really even scoring across the board. I think everyone had between either like 7 to 12 points in that game. But I think it's really easy to only look at the box score. And this is something that I'm just like going to sit here for a moment and just enjoy the fact that we get to do this podcast together and just like started this little hobby, because it's really, I've always seen myself as someone who really loves basketball and understands basketball a lot more than any other sport because I just grew up watching it so much. But doing this podcast has really helped me to think about the game in a larger sense. And I think so often we get drawn to those box score stats. And I even see like announcers and different people like just seeing like what's in the points column, what's in the assists column, what's in the rebound column. But I think if you look there, you're not going to actually get an accurate picture of the way that Carson Cooper, Jackson Kohler, yes, even Shimon Zapala and Frankie Fiddler, quite honestly, and Xavier Booker showed up in that Michigan game. And I wish we were talking about this, like in football, right? Pro Football Focus, different, statistics are able to look at the way that defense does their job. They look at pressures, they look at hurries. I would love to see something like that for college basketball, because we did prevent that pick and roll that Michigan wanted to do between Wolf and Golden. We did prevent them from doing a lot of the things that they wanted to do. And that doesn't show up in a stat line. But Carson Cooper, I think especially, was instrumental in the way that he just guarded in the paint. Jackson Kohler as well. I think there were some times where it felt like, wow, these refs aren't even letting them play clean defense down here. But they did it anyway and really powered through what oftentimes I think for them probably felt like I'm playing against 8 people out here. And yeah, I just really want to shout them out. And I think it's really helped just us doing this together, like appreciate the game of basketball for what it is. I want to say one more thing about this, right? Because if you think about the stat lines and you think about Michigan State's mantra of defend, rebound, and run, you're going to see rebound and run reflected in the stat line, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
But you don't see defense defended in that stat line, in the box score. You're not really going to see that quantified unless maybe you're looking at the other team's stats compared to their usual. But Michigan State's whole game plan doesn't start with rebound. It doesn't start with run. It starts with defend. And I think that is what has led us to all 3 wins this week.
Absolutely. And I think we started talking about the offense first, but let's start with the defense first, because that's what is the first emphasis for Michigan State. And that was the recipe for success against all 3 of these teams. And then they also, in all 3 of these games, rebounded the heck out of the ball. Illinois has the top rebounding margin in the country. Michigan State out-rebounded Purdue. They out-rebounded Michigan by, I think, 10 rebounds. And when you defend, when you rebound, you have the opportunity to then go score, go run out, and do your offense
the way that we want to do it, and not being forced into the half-court offense that a lot of other teams want to push us
on
into.
your own terms.
Yeah.
And that's what Michigan State did. They were playing vintage, old school Michigan State basketball these last 6 days. And it was just so beautiful.
Absolutely. I want to shout out too, like, I think Jaden Akins gets so much hate, and it's very interesting because I just have different opinions about it. You know, the times when I've been really frustrated at Jaden is when he's not doing things that a senior basketball player should do, which is handling the ball well, especially when you're an elite guard. You know, against, I think it was against UCLA, and then also against, I think, really Indiana. Like, he just had some very, very sloppy, unforced turnovers. I feel like everybody else gets mad at him when he's not hitting shots. Friends, we're at Michigan State. Have you been paying attention this season? Like, our field goal percentage, especially behind the arc, is not the greatest. I think we're sitting at about 350th in the country from behind the three-point line. Like, that's not what I get frustrated at. Absolutely, I would love to see him go on a bender and just get that percentage and his confidence boosted up. But I think that's another thing where Jaden Akins' stat line from the game against Michigan does not show the kind of defensive effort and hustle and ball handling skills. I think the times when he was super decisive with the ball were huge impact plays.
Right, and even though he didn't have a good shooting night, he still finishes a night in double digits, and he's just consistently there. And yes, all of us would know that there's another level to Jaden Akins that we've all seen, we hope to see, and hopefully we will still be able to see. But in the meantime, he's not letting his maybe struggles on the offensive side of the ball affect his effort defensively. And against Purdue and against Michigan, really, the Michigan State guards have shut down the backcourts of both these teams. Obviously, Braden Smith of Purdue got his points. He's going to. But really, outside of him, there was not one guard for either team that really was burning Michigan State. They had them on lockdown, and were making both teams kind of two best players get their points, and then just shutting off every single other player, making it so they don't have options, that they're predictable. You know what they're going to do. And they're able to force all of those guys into some errors because they had the ball so much because nobody else was able to get anything going.
Absolutely. And I think a huge part of that, as us having the ball so much, is exactly what you talked about, is our ability to get boards. And I really want to shout out Cohen Carr. He's another person who, if you look at his stat line, he has only got 4 points from the game against Michigan, but he had 3 offensive rebounds, really, I think, in like the first 5 minutes of the game. And think about this. I know some of those, I can't remember how many, led to actual made baskets on the second chance, putbacks. That allowed us to get out to a pretty good lead
Like
in that Michigan game. And so that's why I think I didn't feel so worried. One, we had that cushion. So then, no, I do not want to see them go on an 18-2 run by any means. But even after that, I think the greatest margin we were down by was maybe 7 or 8. Combined with the fact that so many of Michigan's points, I'll give them credit. They did a good job, especially on their defense, trying to mix things up, trying to keep us from getting in a rhythm. But so much of it just came from like bad turnovers on our part and just frankly like some lucky bounces and loose balls.
We had a behind the back pass. We had a pass between his legs going backwards. We had some threes with 2 defenders in guys' faces. So, like, nothing was easy for Michigan on the offensive side of the ball.
No. And so I think a huge part of that is the fact that we were able to kind of flip the script from the first half to the second half, was cleaning up those turnovers. Went from 9 in the first half to, I believe, only 2 in that second half, which really seems to be the story this week. I would love to see us just, hey, let's cut the turnovers to begin with. But it is hard because these teams are coming out here and throwing everything that they have at Michigan State, and we're still showing them that they can't stop us.
If I'm honest, when Michigan State is lined up on the other bench, that's that team's biggest game of the year.
Yeah.
The fact of the matter, especially this year with how Michigan State has performed. So because Michigan State is pretty much everybody's biggest game of the year, like you said, they are going to be bringing out all of the stops,
Yes.
putting it all out on the table, giving it everything they have. And obviously, Indiana, they were able to get it done.
Yeah.
But these last 6 days against Illinois, Purdue, and Michigan State just was the better team.
Yeah.
And all 3 of those games, there's no flukes. There's no excuses. Michigan State went out, performed, and now they're in sole possession of first place in the Big Ten with 4 to go. Have really the driver's seat. Obviously, it's going to still be hard for Michigan State. It doesn't get easy.
Nope.
But they put themselves in position, like Tom Izzo said after the game, to play for a championship these last 2 weeks of the season. And that's really all you can ask for. And we'll see how the results play out, but it's just impossible not to feel amazing about this team right now.
Definitely. Well, I think we really now got to shift to the offense that was this week. And I almost want to just start back at the Purdue game. And I know we're all like high and wanting to talk about the Michigan game, but we cannot let the Purdue game go unnoticed, if only for the fact, and I'm going to steal this from Florida Gulf Coast right now, like it was dunk city on Tuesday night in the Breslin Center. I can't remember. It was either 9 or 10 dunks that we had, I believe, from 5 different players. Pretty sure that Shimon Zapala had 3. Cohen Carr had 3. Carson Cooper had 1. Chase Richardson had 1. And I'm going to let you take a moment to remember the last player. Frankie freaking Fiddler with a cockback one-hand flying in dunk. I didn't think anybody thought he had that in him, and it was just so incredible. I mean, definition of shoving it down their throats all night.
And the balance that you saw from the dunks in that game really was the balance that you saw from the offense, all night. I think Jace Richardson was leading scorer in that game with just 12 points. But you had like 8 or 9 guys that, like you said earlier, were in that 7 to 12 point range. And how the heck do you prepare for that? How the heck do you game plan for that when you have 9 different guys who can have substantial contributions on the offensive side of the ball?
And not only how do you prepare for that, how do you withstand that in game? Because no matter what adjustment you make, somebody else just is able to get it done.
Right.
And I just think the ability for Spartans to have so many different unique scores every game, and it might not be the same 7 to 10 guys sometimes that we have scoring. Any one of them could go off. And that was really kind of the theme of being in the locker room after the Michigan game, just hearing all the different players talking. It was just so cool. You can just feel it in the way that they talk about one another, but especially Jeremy Fears Jr. was just championing all the guys on his team. He's like, we don't even know going into a game whose night it's going to be to go off. He said, we're hard to prep for because we don't even know who's going to do well. You know, maybe it's going to be Cohen's day. Maybe it's going to be my day. Maybe it's going to be Frankie's day or Jackson's day. And that, I think, might be one of the reasons why this team is just so darn fun to watch.
Exactly. And I think it's the exact reason why in all 3 of these games, they have been able to dominate the last portion of each of them. Because if you look at kind of these box scores, you look at Michigan's 2 best players. You look at Purdue's 2 best players. You look at Illinois' 2 best players. All of these guys are playing 35 plus minutes a game. And I can imagine playing 35 plus minutes a game against Michigan State, you're going to get worn down. You're not going to be able to do the same things in the first half that you're doing in the second half. But then you got Michigan State with 7 guys where you might have 1 guy who played over 30 minutes.
Yeah. I'm pretty sure besides Jace, no other player had over 20 minutes against Michigan. And that hurts them, you know, our opponent, both offensively as well as defensively, because when they're in there on defense, they might have a different person that they're matching up every other trip down the court. And then same thing on offense. They've always got a fresh face who is coming in ready to absolutely lock them down on defense. I mean, you get no quarter from this Michigan State team.
Exactly. There's no All-Americans on this team. There might not be a player on the first 2 all Big Ten teams on this team, but they are, guess what, beating all of these All-Americans. They're beating these top players, not only in the Big Ten, but in the country, because they have this depth and because I think not just the depth, but honestly, more importantly, this unselfish
Yes.
just nature about them. Like Jeremy said, is like, we don't really care who it is.
Yeah.
Who the guy that goes off for us. As long as we're winning, like, that's what we want, and we're going to feed them the ball. And the guy they were feeding the ball to the most on Friday night was Jace Richardson.
Because why would you not? The kid is almost unstoppable. His arsenal of weapons feels limitless. I mean, even when he's put in these kind of shut down, tight situations, he pulls out a between the legs dribble into a spin move that I didn't even know a freshman player was capable of. I mean, the kid does not ever miss when it comes to just his ability to hold on to the ball. And we talk about his offense so much, which was frankly incredible this week. But I don't think that he gets his laurels the way that he should on defense either. There is never a time where I'm like, Jace, you just missed your man. Jace, you just turned the ball over. I mean, the kid is just pure consistency and explosiveness across the board.
And we've talked about him, obviously, a lot this season.
Sorry, I just get so hyped up about things. This is so fun.
I do too. We've talked about Jace a lot this season. I've kind of talked about, let's kind of see what happens as the season goes on, where instead of shooting maybe 4 or 5 times a game, he's shooting 10 times a game. And that's exactly what we're seeing. And that efficiency, that control, that composure has not diminished at all with his increased
pressure.
Yeah, pressure.
Right, because the more that you perform there, the more that expectation builds. And I think for so long, and this is why I kind of do love Spartan fans, even though I think sometimes we can be a little nihilistic. We're very tempered and realistic. I think because we've had to play with a chip on our shoulders for so long, we don't get the luxury of like just having these crazy emotions because there's just so many people who want to put us down.
And we've seen so many good teams, so we actually know what it takes to be an elite team that wins championships.
Yeah, that absolutely. But I think, for so long we were just kind of wanting to temper expectations with Jace. And now it's to a point where we do actually kind of expect them. And I think Jace probably feels that to some extent. And he's still able to not only meet, but I would argue exceed, I think a lot of Spartan fans, former players, alumni's expectations for what he can do this season. I almost wish that he'd calm it down a little bit because Jace, we would like you around in East Lansing for at least one more year.
Maybe just tune it down like one notch, that way we get another year out of you.
Oh, goodness.
I think my favorite stretch out of him, and I think it was a little under the radar, it wasn't any of his threes or kind of early buckets. But kind of late in the second half, Michigan State was holding on to like an 8 or 9 point lead. I think it was right after Trey had his back-to-back threes.
Yes.
Michigan kind of starts to go on another little run, and momentum starting to get back in it. Chrysler's getting back into the game.
I think they cut it to a 4-point lead.
I think they cut it to 3 points.
3, yeah.
And on back-to-back possessions, Michigan State went right to Jace Richardson, and he just made it happen.
Yes.
It wasn't wide open kind of lanes to the basket. He was just able to get his shot off, and Michigan State put that pressure on him to get it done. And he scored on 2 straight possessions to kind of weather that storm from Michigan, where Michigan State could then kind of go on another one of their own to put this game away.
Definitely. I think we could talk about Jace for just about forever, but I also want to argue that I think that the player of the week should be a shared position this week. And that might be an unpopular opinion, but I don't think that we can, have this conversation without also crediting Trey Holloman. And it's really because of the way that he showed up in both the Purdue and the Michigan games. And again, it might not be in a way that you necessarily look at his stat line and go like, oh, wow, Trey had an incredible week. I believe he only had 7 points against Purdue. He put up 18 against Michigan. But it was the way in which he was able to make those plays. Trey should just be called Mr. Clutch at this point because he is able to get things done when we desperately need it. He had, I believe, an and one that he's had about halfway through the second half against Purdue that just really helped kind of swing that momentum. The Breslin was going crazy afterwards. He was able to get into that paint in a way that I was kind of criticizing him for a couple weeks ago, that he was getting into the paint and then looking frazzled, like not knowing what to do. No, that decisiveness was there all week. And I think that just fuels Trey's game in such a beautiful way.
I think he is kind of the opposite of Jaden Akins in that way is we'll look at a box score after the game and be like, how the heck did Jaden Akins have 12 points? Like it
I
seemed like he
kind of
was pretty
missed him.
quiet.
Yeah.
But it seems like you said, every single one of Trey's buckets is in a big moment.
Just massive impact.
Yes, and you look against Purdue, it's like, wait, how did the heck did he only have 7 points?
Yes.
It seemed like he was all over the place. But he just, in those big moments when his team needs buckets, he is just getting it done these last 6 days and doing it on all 3 levels.
Yes.
He's getting to the hoop. He's knocking down outside shots. But then he's also, especially against some of these zones we've seen, he's been able to get some of those long twos done better than really anybody else on this team. And when you have a guy like Jace and Trey, who are both feeling it, who can both score at all 3 levels, like, this is just showing you the ceiling of this team where nobody's going to want to play Michigan State in March.
Yeah, absolutely. And it just makes me think about, I took a little bit of insult from some of Tom's comments after the Indiana game of just, he kind of said, to me, it seemed like, no, I'm not really going to prep for the zone that much more. Like, not many other teams are going to run it. Indiana was desperate, I think were the words that he used. But honestly, we're putting teams now in a position where they're desperate enough to run a zone defense against us because it's pretty much the only thing that they've got left in their pocket because we're burning them when they're matching up with us man to man. And now we're starting to be able to show, and I think that ability to score on 3 levels from both Jace and Trey is a huge reason why even that zone isn't working against us anymore.
And I want to get into that more in our We Got It Covered segment because I think there's a lot of good points to talk about as far as how Michigan State has been able to kind of adjust and make things work, even kind of in that first half against Michigan where shots weren't really falling. They were still only down by 4 because they were still able to get good looks off of that zone from inside the 3-point arc.
Definitely. I have one more thing that I think I want to say about just like the offense and just this week. But before we get into that, is there anything else that you want to talk about from this week?
Go for it. Okay. Send us away.
So we started off this conversation, me asking you the moment that's been living rent-free in your mind. And this whole time, I've had a moment just living rent-free in my mind. And it was the pull-up 3-pointer from your very own Jeremy Fears Jr. Just sending it straight to the bank. Is there any better way to seal a game against the U of M Wolverines than banking in a 3 at the Chrysler Center? I mean, like, I think that was the moment where I was like, this is done. We're good. Like, this is done. And I loved it for Jeremy so much. I feel like he's been getting a lot of hate in the last couple of weeks, or, maybe hate's too strong a word. He hasn't been feeling the love. And so for him to be able to just get a couple threes was just so phenomenally fun.
And there was an audible groan at Chrysler when he banked in that 3.
The song that my heart wants to hear.
And that was the moment too when fans started leaving for the exit. And at that point, I think it was still only a 6 or 7 point game with more over 3 minutes
they rolled
to go.
Over.
They're not built for it.
Not built for it.
We're not built for it. They're not ready. And
Fairweather
walked
fans,
in the trap, took over the trap.
Welcome back to the We Got It podcast halftime show, where we kind of get you caught up on all things Spartan athletics, what's been going on in the Spartan sports world this week. And for those of you who rely on these halftime updates to kind of know what's going on, we're sorry that we missed you last week. So we just wanted to get you caught up on a couple of things. By the time that this episode comes out, men's hockey will have played 2 games against Penn State. But at the time that we are recording, they unfortunately just dropped a loss to Penn State on Friday night. They did take it to overtime, though, tying 2-2, and were able to secure one of the 3 points available from the weekend. Penn State ended up taking home the other 2 by winning the shootout.
Women's basketball had a really challenging week this week. They had their trip to Los Angeles.
And let me say, it didn't really go any better for them than it did for the men's team, unfortunately.
And not only did they have to go to Los Angeles, they had to play number 1 UCLA and I believe number 5 or 6 USC.
At the time,
And the UCLA game was phenomenal if you didn't watch it. It was back and forth the whole entire game. Michigan State had a lead for much of the fourth quarter, but just couldn't pull it away at the end. and then just had a tough time against UCLA, kind of keeping within striking distance the whole time. Unfortunately, ended the week 0-2 out in LA, but I was really impressed with the women's fight, kind of playing through the adversity of being across the country against two of the elite teams in the country.
Definitely. And on Sunday, they take on Indiana. I think tip-off's around noon.
Mm-hmm.
And so make sure to tune into that if you have the opportunity to. This team is so fun to watch. Julia Arol and Theron Halleck just have to be one of the most fun, or a couple of the most fun women's basketball players that I think we've seen in quite a long time.
Mm-hmm.
And they've just really come into their own this season, I think.
Absolutely.
Women's gymnastics team has also, again, just continued to dominate. They were not set back at all from that blip against UCLA. They took on, I believe at the time, I want to say number 16 Nebraska at Nebraska and came away with the win. And then they also just defeated Rutgers at home this weekend as well. So just continuing to show up and show out for your MSU sports. Man, it's fun to be a Spartan.
Absolutely. It is now time for this week's episode. We Got It Covered segment, where we kind of dive into a maybe challenging or confusing topic or rule that might be maybe not on everybody's radar as a kind of casual Michigan State fan, or maybe a diehard Michigan State fan. And this week, I think it's kind of a good opportunity to bring in this topic that we honestly, surprisingly, haven't really talked about all year. And that is the zone defenses that teams have started to kind of put at Michigan State in an effort to slow them down. And I think we've had some varying performances over the last couple of weeks. And I think we can kind of talk about maybe why the teams have been playing zones and how Michigan State, especially against Michigan on Friday, have adjusted to that to find success on the offensive end.
Definitely. And if you're listening to this going, wait, I thought that you just said that on the We Got It Covered segment, you guys dive into things that are like strange or confusing. Zone defense seems pretty straightforward, right? But I think also I love this segment because sometimes we dive into the simple things, because I think sometimes, especially for, if you're a new basketball fan or even a new Spartan fan, or are trying to branch out and expose yourself to different sports, it's some of these like simple, taken for granted things that I think we can kind of lose a lot of fans in, because it's almost assumed like, oh yeah, you know what a zone defense is, or oh, you know what a 2-3 zone is, or a 1-3-1 zone is, or the way that teams can switch back and forth from a man-to-man to a zone like we saw Michigan do. But I think it's worth diving into, because I think especially in this day and age of college basketball, you don't get to just have, unless you're Tom Izzo, like one thing that you consistently run, and coaches have to get really creative about how they're running their defense. So let's break it down a little bit more, because unfortunately, very clearly, Michigan State struggled against that Indiana zone in a way that I would argue we haven't seen since the 2018 unmentionable game against Syracuse. We're going to leave that game there. If you want to dig more into that, go back and check out, I think, the episode from Christmas Eve that we did with Matt Sheehan of Locked On Spartans. We get into all of the nitty gritty of that game. And if you want to go back and, little T re-traumatize yourself from that game. But let's get into the zone. Why did it work for Indiana? Why didn't it work for us? And then what did we change to be able to face that zone against Michigan and still come out victorious?
Yeah, and I think, honestly, you kind of have to go back to the USC game. That was the first time we really saw it against Michigan State in a way that really affected them and made a lot of sense. Michigan State was coming off of 13 straight wins. They kind of seemed like this unstoppable force when it came to Big Ten play. USC comes out kind of in this matchup zone and really flustered Michigan State throughout the whole night, kind of ending their win streak.
Yeah.
And then fast forward to a couple weeks ago against Indiana, with kind of their season on the line, desperate, just fired their coach. We see this kind of 2-3 zone again, and Michigan State couldn't get anything going. We've talked a lot this year that Michigan State has struggled from outside shooting the three. One of the worst 50 teams in the country in doing so.
Yes.
And because of that, teams like USC and Indiana have wanted to pack in the paint in order to prevent Michigan State from being able to get easy drives to the baskets, easy dumped-ins to guys like Jackson Kohler.
Force us into that slowed half-court offense that Tom Izzo does not want to run.
Right, and kind of making it, okay, if you're going to beat us, you have to be able to shoot threes or kind of be more creative offensively. And it really stumped Michigan State in both of those games. And that ended in losses where I think really everybody thought shouldn't have been losses.
Yeah.
Fast forward against Michigan, we see kind of a third version of a zone.
Yeah.
Not all three of these zones were different.
Yes.
And for Michigan, they were playing a 1-3-1 zone where they had their big man, Danny Wolf, kind of up top, kind of pressuring the ball handlers with his big wingspan, making those passing lanes small and making it hard for Michigan State to get it to the basket, forcing them to kind of take those outside shots. And for Michigan State, against Indiana and USC, they weren't able to hit those outside shots. And after that, they weren't able to adjust, kind of find more creative ways to get the ball into the basket. Against Michigan, the switch kind of flipped. And despite the first half, those outside shots still not really falling, the difference is they were still being aggressive. They were still trying to drive to the basket.
Yes.
And guys like Trey Holloman and Jace Richardson were able to get inside the three-point arc with the ball to collapse that zone and to make things work for this offense in ways that they weren't able to do in previous matchups.
And I'm going to argue that that didn't just start in the Michigan game. I want to argue that it started in the Illinois game and in the Purdue game. Even though those teams didn't run a zone against Tom, and even though Tom said he wasn't really going to waste, basically, in his post-game presser after Indiana, he basically said, like, I'm not going to waste more time, preparing for a zone. I don't think many other teams are going to run it. I don't know. The way the Spartans started playing and really trying to attack at all three levels, and what I think especially I saw them start to do was be decisive around that charity line of being able to get inside the arc, because again, we know we have not been shooting from behind the arc. You're sick of us saying it. You're sick of hearing it from every announcer on national television. Like, we're not shooting the three ball well. It's very hot and cold for us. But that ability to still get in that perimeter and make floaters, make those little jump shots, get those crisp, clean bounce passes down into the post, which is something we could not do against Indiana. Like, I think all of that skill building, showing ourselves that we are able to do that, building the trust in ourselves that we're able to get these things done when we're not playing a zone. Then when you are playing a zone, it's like, hey, this is our bread and butter. Like, we already know how to do this. Yeah. And I think Trey did that right from the beginning against Michigan. I want to say it was in the first couple of minutes. He just drove straight to that Big Ten logo, pulled up, hit a little jumper, and it was like, okay, we're good to go. And that was when they were in the man. But I didn't feel as worried then when they switched into the zone, because we were already proving to ourselves that we can attack from all these different levels.
Right, and I think what also a zone defense does to you is obviously it packs kind of the paint, makes it more difficult to make those passes to get the ball into the basket. But I also think there's a psychological aspect to it as well, where Michigan State kind of felt like, okay, we have to kind of slow down.
Yes.
We have to have passes and we have to kind of take our time to beat this. And I think, like you said, kind of the foundation they set for Illinois and Purdue is you don't necessarily have to slow down against the zone, especially too, because in the zone, you have to cover that air. You're constantly moving. And if you can be decisive and quick with it, you can catch the defense in bad spots and you can still get to the basket with those crisp passes, but then decisive decisions to drive to the hoop. And Jace and Trey were both able to do that and forcing Michigan to kind of go back and forth, because whenever it seemed like they switched to that zone, kind of maybe be frazzled at the beginning, but then they started to figure it out and Michigan had to go back to that man because they had to keep on changing it up because nothing really was having consistent success against Michigan State.
Definitely. And I think what that point you just made of that kind of like psychological impact of like, they're trying to force us to slow down. And I think a big part of the issue with Indiana, sorry, I keep going back to this game, I know we want to bury it in the past, was not only the zone defense, but the fact that they were harrying us down the court on every single inbound play. just slowed it down so much. And I think the issue with slowing the Spartans down is not that it's even like we're holding onto the ball longer or we've got less time on the shot clock, which I mean is a problem in and of itself. But when we slow down, we hesitate.
Mm-hmm.
And when we hesitate, we lose those crisp, clean passes.
We lose confidence.
We get caught turning the ball over so much more frequently. And I think it's important to go back to this idea of like, we're trying to break down this zone for you. So we're just going to back up like 10 steps for 1 second. A zone at its core is the idea that instead of having a specific man that you are matched up against, that you are following across the court, that you're constantly trying to get a step on defense, instead you are playing an area of the court, and whoever comes into that area, you are then picking up, right? So if you think about it, if you are having very slow, very hesitant passes, you're pretty much always giving the defender the ability to get that step on you. They're following that pass because they can see you starting to make it before you even decided that you're going to do it because you're hesitating so much. And so to your point of being able to have that crisp, clean, fast-paced ball movement, those defenders are going to have a hard time keeping up, even in just that little half-step shift. And that's what's going to give you that open lane to drive. That's going to give you that ability to take that little step and pull up and hit a jumper. Those are the things that help you very quickly dismantle a zone.
Absolutely. And I think too, I mean, it goes without saying, we've said kind of the easiest way to beat a zone is to hit outside shots. And in the second half, Michigan State was able to hit outside shots.
We looked at each other at halftime. We had to keep our lips sealed because we were in the press box, which, I honestly think it was probably really good for me because I have no chill when it comes to the Michigan game. And I was forced to have some chill during the Michigan game. But I looked at you and I said, they're shooting 54% from the field in the first half. There is no way that they can maintain that. Dear goodness, I hope there's no way that they can maintain that. And it's true. Honestly, it was almost an exact inversion as far as field goal percentage from the first half to the second half. I want to say that the Spartans were shooting around like mid 30% from the field in the first half. Michigan, obviously, I just said shot 54%. I think it was almost the exact opposite. I want to say we shot like 53% in the second half and they were in the mid 30s. And so I think, again, we just keep going back to like the depth of this Spartan team, the ability of that depth to wear down the zone, to be able to stay fresh, to continue to make those good decisions. And yeah, it's just massive. I think Trey Holloman in specific, and honestly, Frankie Fiddler, to be quite frank, he did things for us in the second half of that Indiana game that I think I didn't realize in the moment until I went back and looked. Like his ability to make quick decisions and let off quick shots, especially from kind of that 2-point area, is massive. And I think that ability, we've been saying it all night, to be able to attack from 3 different levels is how we have been able to break down that zone.
And I think it really just prepares you for March when you're going to face teams that you're not familiar with. I know kind of early in this season with some of the early mid-major teams, there are some teams that had some kind of different defensive philosophies and approaches. And we were saying that earlier, like these are the kind of games that kind of help prepare you for March because you're getting kind of different tastes of different defenses. And these last kind of 2 weeks, we've seen that. We've seen 3 different zones now thrown at Michigan State. And now they're starting to kind of get that confidence, starting to get those kind of philosophies that what it takes to beat these zones. And now I think there's just not going to be a lot that surprises them come March.
And to be quite frank, I would argue that it's not just this team that has not done well against a zone. I think a zone is Tom Izzo's weakness kind of across his career. And I don't know if I quite want to go there and say it, but I don't know if it's even going to be a weakness for him anymore. Like, I am honestly, after Indiana, I was like, if we see another zone this season, we're done. This season's over.
Same boat.
I'm fed up. I'm done. I'm at the point now where I have seen so many encouraging things from this team over this last 7 days that I'm like, throw a zone at us in March. Go on, try it. Throw a zone at us. These boys are still going to get it done.
You won't.
Gosh, I love being a Spartan fan. There's nothing better than beating Michigan, and there's nothing better than beating Michigan at the Chrysler Center. And to be fair, I'm just going to put this out there because I need one more good jab. The Chrysler Center has nothing on the Breslin. Their student section, honestly pathetic. If they didn't have their sparkly cowboy hats, they would have had nothing. I mean, I don't think they started one unique cheer. The only reason that I think the Chrysler Center is so difficult to play against, it's a small arena, and I don't know what they did to the acoustics in that place. It's loud. But that benefited the Spartans because
Mhm.
maybe 10% of the fan base there were Spartan fans, and they were making the go green, go white chants echo
Mhm.
throughout that building. And so, you know what? Let's let our own go green, go white chant echo out to end this episode. Jonah,
Go green,
go white,
go
go
state.
state.